If you race long enough, there will be hopefully those very rare occasions where most everything goes wrong. Along with everything that you may have seen in my previous video, I woke up this morning with intestinal problems, the big D. This can be a very short race for me, or a very miserable race. So I'm going to start and see what happens.
I know, but I took it. And I'm with it.
This race is typically known for a number of things, and one of those things are incredible heat. We were lucky this year. We were experiencing a bit of a cold spell here in California. The high for today was going to be about 87, and we started this race at about 8:45 a.m. The cycling community, this is Steve Grusis, the Cycling Greek. You see a pretty big pack here. We had only 5 starters in the 65 plus. There were only about 4 starters in the women's Force 5s, and about 13, I think, in the 50 plus Force 5s. And we were the last 3 categories of the race, and so we started together. It's my understanding that a fondo takes place on the same course, where the registration fee is at least $100, and they get 1,000 registrations. Here we had trouble getting about 120 people to sign up for this race. The reason for this is a conversation for another video. Because of what was to come, I was doing a lot of wheel sucking. In fact, I stayed toward the back of the pack. As we started to approach some critical areas of the race, I noticed some of the 65s would move up, and so I would move up with them, still staying in back of them. The first critical area of the race didn't turn out to be critical at all. It used to be a gravel section. This was paved over last year, as was 80% of the second gravel section. At this point, we're about 10 kilometers into the race, and my body's still holding together. Referring to the conversation we had in the car at the beginning of this video, the video I mentioned of the mistakes that I made this week that may still have ruined this race for me is linked in the description below. On top of that, the diarrhea I experienced earlier this morning, I have no idea what the cause was. For those uninitiated with the big D in bicycle racing, the main concern is not those in back of you seeing a small brown spot forming, then expanding at a significant rate. It is dehydration and the inability to absorb nutrients. I could tell before the start I was depleted of calories. I was eating a couple bananas throughout the morning and trying to slowly take in some other calories. Also, I always make sure I had a bottle of water with me. During my warm-up, I was feeling so-so. I told my friends in the pack that I may get dropped, and if I get dropped early, I'm just going to turn around and come back. Getting dropped would probably happen before the climb, or at least on the climb. Well, enough of that for the moment. Going back to the action on the screen, we are on the first gravel section that's been paved over. The increase in speed has made me concerned, and I didn't want to get gapped behind anybody, so I moved up. As I alluded to earlier, I'll only move up as much as I need to, and I'll keep moving up until the first true critical point of this race, the climb. However, there was one more area that I had to be concerned about with my positioning. We are now on the paved over portion of the second gravel section. Now, the whole section wasn't paved over. There was about 20% left, and we're just hitting it now. And there's a lot of loose sand. It's not bad. There's good areas and some deep areas. So there's times when my back end is sliding around, and I can tell that the other people in front are starting to slide around. What I don't want to have happen is be in back of somebody that's sliding around, because if they're sliding around, they can fishtail or make some other kind of movements and then cause a crash or cause me to slow down. And if I have to put my foot down, it's so hard to get started again and get your speed up. All this time, I'm thinking about when I'm going to move out from this pace line and form my own line. That's going to cost me more energy. I'm going to be out in the wind, but then I'll be safer. But am I going to be paying for that later on? That gap in front of me seals the deal in terms of my decision. I'm getting out of this pace line, and I'm not going to have anybody in front of me. Pretty much I held to that until we got off of the gravel section. But once we got off the gravel section, now we started the rollers. And the rollers, they'd head into the main climb. It is here my positioning was going to be limited to about the top 8. Jumping to the end of the rollers, this is the start of the climb. At least what I'm considering a start of the climb based on the gradient and what I'm seeing. You'll notice I added a couple of gauges to the overlays at the top center of the screen. Distance and time. I am sitting 6th wheel. Everybody in front of me is in the 50 plus Force 5s. I'm guessing that those immediately on my wheel are part of the 65 plus category. Still not knowing what may or may not happen to me due to the previous events of this week, I'm feeling pretty good. With my heart rate still in the 120s, I don't seem to be feeling any undue stress. I'll keep following my plan and ride wheels as long as I can with the front group. Now, the person that was in front of me, the Velo Kings rider, that's Russ Freeman from Fresno. We're together on training rides every once in a while, and he's a pretty strong guy. But he went off to the side. I wasn't sure if he was going to jump up, if he's watching anybody, or if he's starting to feel it. What I don't want to have happen is a gap develop where I have to go fill it. I'm starting to get a little wary of number 795 in the red and the black on my right side, but he's going around this other Body Concepts rider who seems to be drifting back. This climb from where I started to measure it is about 3.6 miles, and so panic is not what I want to do right now, so I'm just following wheels. That gap is slow in getting filled by number 795, and I noticed that Russ is starting to drift back just a bit. 795 does make contact, but now there's a bit of a gap between the first and second wheel. I don't know what's happening behind me, and I don't care. I'm focused on those three in front of me. I'm looking at 795's pedal stroke, and he seems to be laboring, but he's still connected. I'm also looking at that gap between the first and second wheel. The gradient gauge on the left side of the screen says 0, but it's not 0. It's got to be 1%, at least a very false flat. My heart rate now is approaching 140, and well, you can see what's happening on the screen. Up ahead, we'll be starting what we call the switchback section. They're not all switchbacks, but there's some tight turns that are coming up, and it's that section where things get steeper. And it's here where the gap between the first and second wheel is now expanded about 4 bike lengths, where I decide I've had enough. I got to get up to him. And when I make my move, it's decisive. When I get onto his wheel and realize that I'm not overly stressed at all, it was at that point that neither the bad moves I made earlier this week nor the big D I encountered earlier this morning was going to have a negative effect on my race. It was pretty early in this climb that I realized that this guy was a better climber than me. And unless he had significantly slowed down, I was not going to go in front and pull. Now there were times when he would let up just a little bit, maybe because he needed to take an extra breath or from a gear change, but other than that, he was pretty steady. Now, let's talk about those gear changes. I've spoken in the past about the fine line between aerobic and anaerobic death, and I was certainly using that here because this was a perfect situation. You'll notice my heart rate in the lower left-hand corner. I'm in the low 150s. For all you young'uns out there, that's nothing. But for an old guy like me, and I just turned 67, that means I'm putting a lot of effort into this. Now, my max heart rate, at least last year, was in the low 160s. I have no idea what it is this year. I know that when I get to about 155, 156, then I'm getting very close to the edge. In fact, that could be my red line point. Everyone has what I call a little governor on their heart that determines the time between beats. When you're young, that time gap is very small. As you start to age, that time gap starts to increase. It's a protection mechanism for your heart. My goal for this climb was to crest with this guy. If I am able to do that and not have any 65 pluses in our group, because I have no idea again who's behind me, then my chances of winning this race are pretty darn high. The top of this climb happens, I think, around the 20-mile mark of this race, and this race goes for about 68 miles. My best chance right now to get to the top of this climb with this guy is in my pedal stroke. I need to use my easiest gear possible to stay with him. For those not familiar with my videos, the concept of riding the fine line between aerobic and anaerobic death is that you want to use the easiest gear possible because you're using your aerobic system. You can use that over and over again, it recovers pretty darn quick. If you have to use a bigger gear, you're starting to use more muscle. You're producing metabolites, waste material. Therefore, the concept of riding that fine line is to stay in that easy gear as long as you can until you start to redline. Then you shift over to a bigger gear and you take the pressure off of your aerobic system and put it on your muscles. You do that until you start to, or before you start to get bogged down. Then you go back to your aerobic system. You go to that lighter gear. And by then your aerobic system will be recovered. So you keep doing that. And then again, when you start to redline, then you go back to that bigger gear and you go back and forth until hopefully you're at the top with the leaders or you've been dropped. At 1.1 mile, we are just at about the 1/3 mark of this climb. During my being on his wheel, I never looked at my heart rate, so I'm looking at my heart rate now that I'm processing this video, 156. That tells me that maybe my heart rate, my max heart rate, is in the 160s still. I'm waiting for it to go down into the 150s as just another sign of increasing age. Let's talk a little bit about weight now. Looking at 792, he seems tall. I'm 6 foot, maybe just a little hair past 6 foot. And but he looks pretty thin. He looks pretty light. So I'm going to guess that he's around 150 to 155. I am at 163. I was about 161 a week and a half ago, and that's part of what my video that I referred to that's linked in the description below. And I decided, this is kind of not a rest week, but I thought I'd lose a little extra weight. Lighter, you can climb faster. Oh, look at that. My heart rate's up to 157 right now. Okay, back to my weight. So I got my weight down to 159 and a quarter. And that's when everything went to hell in a handbasket. You can look at the video and then see the details of that. Suffice it to say, I had to eat. And so again, 163 coming into this race. You may have noticed as we took that corner that 792 looked over his left shoulder, and what he was doing is looking at the roads below to see where everyone else was. I did the same thing, and I didn't see anybody. Now, there are a couple people behind us. They may be right behind us, they may be off a little bit, but there's no one coming up behind them. So again, I'm thinking, yes, got to get to the top with this guy. But I'm also thinking, man, I hope the top is coming soon because this is getting tough. My heart rate has crept to 158. He jumped, got a little bit of distance on me, and I worked my way back up to him. This guy is doing a job on me. Leesville was one of the 2 races I wanted to focus on. And the other race is happening in a month, and that's going to be the Patterson Pass road race. That race has a 3+ mile climb that we do twice, and it has a couple of smaller but significant climbs. Now you notice somebody went ahead of me because I couldn't hang on to 792's wheel. So now I'm hoping to hang on to his wheel. Letting up on the power for just a little bit gave me just enough a little bit of a rest, so I'm still connected with these guys. My heart rate's now at 159. Yeah, my max is definitely still in the 160s. I get to stave off, even for the moment, further evidence of increasing age. It now looks like the positive effects of that little bit of rest have now gone away. We are at the 1.6 mile mark. Even though I'm literally on the edge, everybody that goes by with them, I look at their number, and I see that so far that they're 50 pluses. I'm also thinking that if I was able to stay with those guys, that's 4 people that I could just ride the wheels, and that would be my win. Also, trying to attach to any modicum of hope, I'm looking at those guys and saying, they're still within grabbing distance. I just need a little bit of rest, and then I'll go up and I'll go get them. Heart rate's still around in the mid 150s. And it's about 2 miles to go to the top. I only know that now because I'm processing the video, but at the time I was thinking, the top's not that far away. Well, apparently it was. Just a 1/10 of a mile later, another person goes ahead of me, and it's another 50 plus. I started thinking, yes, I can go to the top with this guy, then we can work to catch up to those guys. Or maybe those guys will slow up and this guy will drag me back up to them. The possibility of a win was still not lost. A mile later, the leaders are now out of sight. It is also here where I'm starting to lose contact with the wheel that I had. My immediate goal that I'm thinking is to cut my losses, stay close enough to him, see if I can jump up to him when we get to the top, then we can work together in hopes of catching the others, or at least staying away from any other 65 pluses that may be nearby. Jumping ahead 0.8 miles, you can look up ahead and see a small figure there. That's the guy I was chasing. As soon as he gets out of sight by curving to the right, he'll start descending. I was not able to fulfill that brilliant plan that I had thought of. That was plan B. Plan C now is to chase him, catch him, then work together to catch the others. Yeah, a big ask. I wasn't going to be able to catch him on my own, and I looked back previously and I saw a couple riders coming up. I slowed because I wasn't going to be able to do anything on my own, and I was hoping they were 50 pluses. Well, when they came by, it was Bob and Bob from my race. My possible first place has now gone to third place. Both of them can now sprint me. Bob Gorman from Body Concepts, the rider in the yellow, is the one that can outsprint any of us. Now that plan C has been thwarted, I have to think of a plan D. Right now, nothing's coming to mind. But wait, there's a gravel section coming up, the last gravel section. And it's a sharp right turn coming into it. And it looks a little deep. They are hesitant. I go on the outside and just power through it, hoping that they're going to stay hesitant. If this wasn't a gravel section, there's no way I could get away from these guys. And in fact, I don't even know if I'm able to get away from them now. I'm not looking back, I'm just concentrating on the gravel, trying to stay away from any deep parts, and anything that looks pretty hard I'm trying to stay toward. I don't quite remember, but I think this gravel section's 3 miles long, or at least it felt like it was 3 miles. There were a couple times when the roads were open and I could see way ahead, and I could see that 50-plus rider that I was chasing. My entire time on the gravel, I never looked back. It was more of a psychological thing. Sometimes I think I would hear them, but I was just assuming that I was putting distance on them. I didn't want to turn around, see them, and then that would just take the wind out of my sails, so to speak. As I was nearing the end of the gravel section, I was starting to feel a little something. I'd look at my rear tire, and it would be fine, but it's really hard to say because I'm often bouncing on the gravel section and then trying to stay away from the deep stuff. I don't know if you can see this, but this is the valve core, the valve and the extension for the tire I was using. And it broke off here, and I don't think I'll get, when I get my glasses on, because of my old guy eyes, I'm going to think that the extension is what broke. I hope so, so I don't have to replace that tire. See, I got this going again so I could show you my buddy Brian here. Took a turn too fast, and also to give the sage verbiage that my buddy Bob is going to say.
So Steve today rode like a man possessed.
Oh yes.
Right up there on the climb with the front climbers. Unbelievable. I told him he needed to take 5 seconds out on me today, and he probably took 20 seconds out on me today. And not only that, but we caught him at the top. And on the
No, you caught him on the descent.
Did we catch on the descent?
Yeah, I never saw anybody in back of me at the top.
And then on the gravel descent, the gravel section,
yes,
after the descent, you put probably 300 yards on us, 300 meters on us.
Wow.
It was amazing. The guy was riding with Bob Montori, not Bob Montague, Bob
Yeah,
Montori, said, "Did Steve go down?" I said, "No, he's way up the road." And then we come across, then we finally see him, side of the road.
Yeah.
But
That
you
was
were
a
like,
heartbreak to see.
you just kept pulling away from us on the gravel, and I'm like, oh my God, I thought I was going to go down like 5 times on the gravel, and you just kept going. Maybe because you were on flat tires.
Who knows?
But you were gone. But that was an awesome ride, Steve. Awesome ride. The diarrhea thing threw me off.
Yeah.
And then Bob Montori, okay, I'm going to tell you a story. Bob Montori rides with a chili pepper taped to his top tube.
Yeah.
Okay, as for cramps. And then with about a mile to go, I see him reach for the chili pepper. And I go, that's the first sign. He's struggling, right? So then with 1K to go, he's just sitting behind me. So I pull over and he pulls up. And I said to him, you just going to sit back there? And he goes, that chili pepper didn't go down too well. And then with 200 meters to go, he reaches back like this. And it was a fake.
Oh.
So I took off, but he got on me, but he couldn't stay. But that was kind of a funny little. He's got his chili pepper, so beware of him with the old.
Yeah.
I wish I thought of this, but I didn't. It's a wrap.